the landscape that we're working to, government changes, governance and delivery. Let's just touch upon that. Interestingly, when we held our TSI conference in Edinburgh, our annual conference last June, the new Consumer Minister on the day used that conference as part of his debut, and we were delighted with that because we have a lot of time and regard for Ed Davey. And on that occasion, of course, he spoke about the consumer advocate. I only use that example because he was reined in by the official that was sitting next to him, but nonetheless it's an example of the speed of change of thinking, because that was after the election, it was a new minister, and we were still talking at that time, or at least he was, about a consumer advocate. Well, now, of course, we no longer have the consumer advocate, nor are we likely to have the body that was probably going to house that consumer advocate. And I think that just is an indication of the change, the speed of change and the significance of some of those changes. If you look at some of those headings on that particular slide, it's the whole issue of the movement from centre to local that I think is driving much of this. The big society drivers. I think we're all trying to understand and interpret what big society means, and certainly I think many place their own interpretation upon that, one that suits them at any particular time. I'm not sure that we quite understand what big society yet means. We haven't yet managed to translate that into many of the services that we're currently concerned with. And localism is again an interesting phrase. What do we actually mean by localism? And I'm just interested, even today, when we look at the changes in the National Health Service, to see the movement towards GPs, and localism, if ever there was one, in that sense, the disbandment of the centre and the regions in terms of the National Health Service infrastructure. But then, of course, we see a little blip in the context of flu jabs, and immediately we see the government's particular representative in that saying, I think we better bring this back to the centre, because that's the only way we can ensure that the nation receives its adequate availability of jabs. And I think that's the issue about balance, because if you're a cynic, of course, localism is about shifting blame, shifting responsibility. As if you're a proponent, then it's about shifting the ability to excel and succeed. And we shall see. And localism, of course, is something that local government has called for. After all, it is a local service, and I think this government is saying, you asked for it and you have got it, in a way that perhaps we haven't seen for a long, long time. Localism itself, nothing new to trading standards. It's a locally based service. That's its strength. Its other strength, of course, is the ability to combine, to work with one another to ensure that there is a sufficient national and international impact. And I think the other interesting part about this is we've quickly seen the disbandment of those checks and balances that might have gone with a localism agenda. For example, the rapid loss of the Audit Commission, almost overnight. The complete loss, effectively, of any KPIs. There is little to measure service output and outcomes in the modern localism-driven arena. Some may applaud that, some may fear it. I think for trading standards and small services of that sort, we have always looked to see some attachment to appropriate measures that might just help to ensure that the local authority's overall performance assessment had some bearing upon its performance of trading standards. All that is lost, and we have to work closely with that. And we're seeing, and I'll come on to funding a bit more, Austin, later on, but we're seeing now this rapid train of announcements as to the consequences of the front-loading of the CSR funding settlement. And when we saw the row last week over Manchester City's announcement, the loss of 2,000 jobs, immediately Unite, just picking up that particular baton, a city council that suddenly found itself with a shortfall of 110 million as opposed to the 50 million that it was anticipating. You see the consequences. Only yesterday, and I think we have some colleagues here from Hampshire, only yesterday Hampshire announced 1,200 job losses. Equally announced on the same day was Norfolk announcing 1,000 job losses just in its first year. And Norfolk anyway has announced a loss of 1 in 3 jobs over the next 1 to 4 years. So we're starting to see some significant dragstick, and that's part of your blitzkrieg, if I can use your words, Michelin, that regard. That particular statement is obvious. Last year's CSR will make a watershed for public services. What's TSI doing about it? Well, as Austin knows, and thank you very much for all your years of support on the all-party group, that all-party group will never be more important than it's going to be over these coming months and years. Because what TSI is doing is trying to supplement the good work of our colleagues working locally by way of ensuring that we take the story as strongly and positively as we can into the centre. And the work that we're doing in Westminster, in this Parliament, the work that we're doing in Edinburgh, in Cardiff, and with David in Belfast, is going to be critically important to ensuring that trading standards as a subject remains on the national agenda. It won't be good enough to allow it simply to dissipate into local-only agendas. It can never be that sort of profession and service. It has to be seen in terms of its national totality and entity if it's going to affect for the better the modern UK that we now live in. Policy changes we've seen that John and his colleagues have been working with us all in devising and presenting, and many of those, of course, of significance to you all. I won't run through all of these because you'll have seen many of them, but let me just pick out one or two issues. The two pillars in the second bullet point. So when Vince Cable talked about the two frontline services in support of consumers and identified trading standards and citizens' advice, well, that obviously forms a platform for the consumer landscape consultation that we're going to see, John, in March, I think 7th of March, without committing you. But I'm sure that will be all the work that we're doing now with BIS and others is clearly going to inform that consultation, and that will be possibly the most critical consultation document ever to have faced trading standards and indeed the broader consumer community. So that document is going to be amazingly important. We're not easily flattered, I should say. So when the Secretary of State says trading standards, you are the front line, then to be frank, thank you ever so much, Secretary of State, but please, we're past being flattered. And that's what I want to see behind that is substance. And of course, part of the concern we have is the issue of substance. And I will come to that.